No.
Oh, Joanne.
It's okay. I'll survive.
I'm shocked.
I know.
I was going to say, because I'm using a different mug today.
Oh, yeah, no.
Okay, we'll make this really, really short. We'll say hi and then we'll go by. I'm joking, folks. Joanne did not get her coffee before she sat down to record this, and I feel like she should go get some.
I feel like I should go get some. It will be good. It'll all be good. But yes, I know I have not had any coffee yet.
How was your week?
My week was good. I was in Virginia. I was at Mount Vernon.
Was it? Oh, that's what we're expecting to go. That's our vacation.
To Mount Vernon.
Yeah, well, Virginia. Yeah, to do all the historic sites. I've never done them.
Oh, very cool. No, totally worth doing. And Mount Vernon has like all kinds of new visitor centers and things there. So, but no, there's like beyond a lot of things to do in Virginia. So very cool. I can give you advice.
Please do. So I will say Buddy is phenomenal at arranging tours because he not only does all the research, he actually goes on Instagram and searches all the hashtags. So, so he's like, well, the place to eat in this town is over here. And man, you see places you never would have seen otherwise. And one of the best Mexican meals I have ever had was in some town that, you would have driven right by it. And he's like, no, the locals say this one's good. It really was.
You were right.
That's right. So lots going on in the United States this week. I got to tell you, what jumps out to me is the fact that Americans seem, anyway, to be focusing on corruption in the government, which is such an interesting topic, both because of the way in which it really originally meant the corruption of the body politic. That is, it was like a cancer, which would be interesting to talk about, but also because, the amount of just money, cash money, this family has taken out of our pockets,
right,
is truly shocking. And I think to some degree, the numbers are so huge, people, and it's in such sneaky ways, like through cryptocurrency or through
now it's not sneaky anymore.
Right. But now, especially with things like the fact that Trump is hitting the U.S. Treasury up for $10 billion, I think people are paying attention to it. And I thought it might be interesting to talk about corruption, because when we think about it like Teapot Dome or Abscam, or, almost literally somebody walking along with a suitcase full of cash, which is interesting. But it actually speaks quite deeply to money, government, who's in charge, and I think ultimately to the relationship in a democracy between democracy and the rule of law, but also between ordinary people and really rich people who can game the system. So how do you feel like talking about, I feel so guilty. I'm taking a sip of coffee now.
Go for the coffee, Heather. Go for the coffee. No,
I'll just be over here. How do you feel about talking about corruption?
Yeah, no, we could definitely talk about corruption. And you're right. I mean, it touches on, in the most fundamental way, right? If in a democratic form of government, it's us, our will, but also our money, that is what keeps things going on a certain level, then yeah, corruption is corrupting on both levels, corrupting in going against our will, and then also stealing in one way or another our money, which is true. Now, as soon as you said corruption, when we were first, right before we came on, like, let's talk corruption. And I said, Hamilton's in the mix. He is in an old world kind of a way. So in the founding era, the founding folk assumed that they were doing something, not just a new kind of government, a republic, a democratic republic versus a monarchy, but they also thought that they would be doing something less corrupt, and a sort of new world version of government that would not have the corruption baked in, that it would be something different. And so there's a story of a dinner party that we know about because, of course, Thomas Jefferson wrote it down, because this is what Thomas Jefferson did, was take notes. I love the way that one eyebrow just went up on your face.
I don't want to talk about Thomas Jefferson on a beautiful Saturday morning.
I know. And I'm not even just doing it to irk you, but he tells a story about a meal at his house during Washington's presidency, and Hamilton's Secretary of the Treasury and Jefferson's Secretary of State, and John Adams was there, the vice president. And John Adams said, purge the British government of its corruption, and it would be the finest government on the face of the earth. And Hamilton said, with its corruption, it is the finest government on the face of the earth, and of course, Jefferson immediately wrote this down. Now, what Hamilton was saying on a very sort of Hamiltonian pragmatic way is that's what makes government go. Corruption. That in one way or another, he always, essentially believed that, we needed a strong government because people were not necessarily well-meaning. They were not going to think of the general good. A strong government is going to channel our base passions into a pathway that in one way or another is going to serve the general public. So in his mind, corruption was acceptable because that's one of the things that inspired people, particularly people with power, to do things in one way or another. And you just had to have a system that helped channel that in one way or another. But so he saw himself as being pragmatic and not a sort of goofy optimist about what humankind was and about how government works. Now, clearly, Thomas Jefferson didn't agree with that. Not only did he write it down, but he told that story multiple times in his old age. You know what Hamilton once said? And it's not, it's very believable because that's very of a piece with what Hamilton thought, is that corruption is going to happen. So you just have to have a system that in one way or another is going to direct things so that, number one, perhaps it's less likely to happen. And number two, if it happens, it's not going to be the worst form of corruption possible. That gets us to another topic, which we don't have to talk about this morning, but that is process. Because that's a thing that, when the Constitutional Convention was making the Constitution, yes, they were creating a form of government. But what they felt was the most important thing that they were doing was creating a process of government. It was creating processes that they were putting in place so that when things went awry, that those would be there to be able to be turned to help put things right. So that's, oddly enough, I think before I just put this that way, I hadn't thought of it this way, but the corruption and constitutional processes were sort of a piece. You can't assume that there will be no corruption. But if there's corruption, then you rely on constitutional and legal and other procedures to be there in place to help move things in a direction that are not going to necessarily cause the maximum amount of damage to the body politic, as you put it, and to the American people at large.
So I have a bunch of questions. I will point out that that's Andrew Jackson, that, to the victor go the spoils, the whole idea of that and of the thread that ran through the Democratic Party until, we get the Civil Service Law of 1883 is that the only way you can interest people in politics is by making sure there is, if not a cash payoff, although that too, that there is benefit, financial payoff for them, a job or a contract.
That's I would say Hamilton's not quite that Jacksonian. He's not quite like, give them something and then they'll be with us. I would just say Hamilton, he believed in the fact that whatever was going on in the United States was going to be a better version of what had gone on before. So I don't think he blatantly feels like you got to pay people off, you got to give them something or they're not going to be with you. That's Jackson. But I would say Hamilton thought it's ridiculous to assume that there will be no corruption, which is a different level from what.
Well, but there is also, though, if you think about that sort of at a higher level, I've always liked Hamilton because of his understanding that people are people and you're going to have bad people and you have to find ways to make sure that they don't get into control. And that's your process right there. Right. So that makes that makes sense. You could make the argument that what we're looking at now, especially since Watergate, is a time in which that process has entirely broken down.
Yes.
And that, and that itself is really interesting. Why have we let this happen? One of the things that I keep hammering on is we talk about all the changes we have to make in this country. And a lot of those changes are simply, we need to enforce the laws that are already on the books.
Right.
And that's a different thing than, oh my God, we got to reinvent this from the ground up. And how we got to this place where it's acceptable for the president literally to accept a $400 million plane from a foreign country that we are now putting our tax dollars into refurbishing is crazy.
But it's you sort of went back to Watergate, and sad but true is, and it's not necessarily better to say, corruption is not better if it's hidden. But one of the things that's distinctive about this moment, as opposed to the 1970s, is the degree, the flagrancy of the corruption, the degree to which nobody's even hiding the corruption. And now, like, not even pretending that it isn't what it is, right? It is crazy to assume that, accepting that kind of a gift and having it go to the president as opposed to the nation is somehow or other not corrupt. But I would say, as with so many other things about this particular regime, they are now at a point, because they're kind of relying on the fact that the laws that we have on the books, that the standards and the norms that we have on the books, that the Constitution that is the books, they're kind of relying on the fact that these things aren't being enforced. And once they believe that, they can be even more flagrant with what they're doing. And in a way, that gets us back to where we started this morning, which is people are actually noticing, because it's not hidden. It's just there. It's like, yeah, well, I'm going to go to the IRS and try and get your money back to me, Donald Trump. It's out in the open to a degree that some of them must think doesn't matter, because they've been doing this all along and they've been getting away with it all along. And you and I both have talked for a long time about how accountability, free and fair elections, the rule of law, and accountability being three of the absolute bases of what democracy is. They've been tooling along here with those things basically not being in play, that to a certain degree, they're just making assumptions that they can get away with it. And maybe one of the interesting things that's happening now is that increasingly, number one, people who hadn't noticed before are noticing. And number two, there's a shift in the wind here, and people aren't necessarily as willing to either sit back and say, oh, well, that's the way it is, or to assume that this is just, this is what happens with governments, this is how governments work. I would be interested to hear what you have to say, because to me, I talked about this last night, it feels as though there is a shift in people's will and awareness, that people are pulling away who had not necessarily pulled away before.
Pulled away from the idea that Trump can do whatever he wants.
Correct.
So I'm actually quite interested in how we got to the place where this sort of behavior was considered acceptable. Because if you think about some of our great scandals in the past, certainly our corruption scandals, they do tend to be, all the caveats, one person taking some kind of payment in order to get an advantage that doesn't disrupt the system. It's somebody taking a payment. It's, somebody getting the oil fields and
bag of cash, right?
Yeah, bags of cash, literally, or suitcases of cash. Actually, it'd be fun. Well, never mind. But, think of all that. We could go through times in our history where somebody has been like, with, $50,000 in a kava bag. Because they're always stupid stories.
They are stupid, and they have to sing the little song that you.
Yes, that's right. That's our little cartoon. But so to me, the question of how you break down a system so that the people within it look the other way for issues of corruption the way they are now, you break down the system, is the central question of this moment. Because we had, after Watergate, we put in place a whole bunch of laws that said, okay, we didn't think a president would try to do this, but Nixon did, so we're going to get the Impoundment Act, the Impoundment Act. We're going to get, all these acts saying you can't do this. And this administration is just openly breaking them. And I wonder what made people between 1974 and the present, or not the present, 1974 and 2 years ago say, this is the way it is. And me, I always come down to the trajectory of democracy being about the media and the way that the stories that people understand. And if you think about the degree, and I'm just spitballing here, but if you think about the degree to which after Watergate, people who disliked Nixon sort of had given up on the government altogether, and people who loved Nixon had given up on the corporate media and instead turned to their own very right-wing media, first through like mimeograph sheets and then through the specialized publishers, and then on into talk radio, and then on into the Fox News channel, and so on. you got this breakdown in the idea that A, that democracy could work, and B, that the people had any control over what happened in it. And that seems almost to have been nefarious, the idea that you had no control. And so we got to a place where, if you think about, the Biden administration and the way it was portrayed in the media, especially media that was sort of a branch of a corporate entity, just drove me bananas, because, they would do something huge like the Inflation Reduction Act or the Chips and Science Act or the American Rescue Plan or whatever, and it would get absolutely no press. And Trump would go, eat crayons, and it would get it would have all the headlines. And it seems to me now, with the rise of an independent press and the reality that so much of what people thought they would get from the second Trump administration turned out to be the ashes that people like us always said it was going to be, you're starting to see much more widespread, true understanding, not only of the way democracy works, but that people actually have an influence in it. So the breakdown, I'm attributing both the breakdown of democracy and the rise of corruption, and now the addressing of that to independent, or at least fact-based journalism.
Interesting. Well, I think that's true. And I'll add to fact-based journalism the idea of framing. Right? Because at some point you talked about the story or the narrative or the frame by which we understand things. And that's crucial, right? It's on the one hand, there's facts and us understanding on an ongoing basis what's happening. On the other hand, there's also the larger framing, the story that is being told. And you, a few moments ago, referred to the idea that we have no power, we can't do anything, that's just the way it is. And that now with more fact-based and more independent media, we can see that. I also think that part of the framing that we were set up with at the beginning of this particular administration was, it's the most obvious thing in the world, but I have to say it, the idea that you can become president when you try to overturn a free and fair election.
Yeah.
That simple fact, right? It's even, and, in my mind, as ever, is, presidential immunity, which is huge. But the simple fact that happened, and then things went percolating along and Donald Trump became president, that fact in and of itself it frames everything that comes after it in a different kind of a way, not just for them, but for us, even without necessarily thinking about it. I think on a certain level, we begin to think, can we do anything about this? That just happened. That was obviously wrong. And I know I'm not the only one who will never forget what it felt like to watch the horror of that happening. I will never forget what that felt like. And for that to happen, and then, we move ahead in time and that person ultimately becomes president down the road, that's, whether we want to acknowledge it or not, that teaches a framing, that teaches a lesson that is going to frame the way we understand what comes after.
Well, and then, of course, Trump pardoned all those people, and now they're trying to get payment from the Treasury. I mean, so let me throw something else into the mix, though, because, I just made this argument for the media, but you could also make an argument for the collapse of the Soviet Union and the fact that the oligarchs who rose in the former Soviet satellite countries wanted to park their ill-gotten gains in democracies, because where the rule of law existed, they knew that money would be safe. And so money poured into both London and into the United States. And as it poured into these regions, they continued to support politicians on the far right who would keep taxes low and cut programs and so on, so that their money would not be touched by the sorts of things that promote democracy. And that, I think, brings up the issue that I started with that also interests me, is to what degree is this narrative that I'm talking about, and not just from the media, but from movies and from books and from religion and from all these different things, to what degree is that driven by the true extremes of wealth in at least the United States? I can't speak for what happens in Europe, but Part of what we're seeing, it strikes me as, is things like Elon Musk, who put, close to $300 million into electing Donald Trump, simply getting all the contracts and getting all the lawsuits against his companies dismissed. And, you can buy it with this amount of wealth. You can buy the government you want, even in a democracy. And I wonder if you go back to the framers and the founders, really. You mentioned very offhand that the system in Britain was corrupt. And I always think about the military and, why Cromwell, when he comes in, creates a new model army where people actually get promotions based on whether or not they're any good at being in the army, as opposed to just the fail sons of, whomever. They get a commission and then they take all their men out to die. And that's one of the reasons that the new model army was so successful. But I had not thought about that, being able to buy your way into virtually anything in Britain. But the framers must have looked at that and said, we don't want rich guys taking everything, because you're going to end up with, say, the untrained son-in-law of the president trying to negotiate the end of a war that they started seemingly somewhat by accident. At the same time, he's shaking down other countries for billions of dollars. Right. What would they have said about all that?
Well, right. And that gets us back to corruption for sure, right? Shaking down these other governments, people who aren't actually really even officially in a political position in one way or another, finding ways to benefit themselves. But, it's interesting. This does indeed bring us back in some way to Hamilton, because he was very focused on getting wealthy people to invest in the government, right? Because he said straight out, right? If we can get rich people to invest in one way or another in the government, to buy bank stock, whatever it is, if we can get them to give their money into the government in some way or another, we will have their influence and we will have their money. And for this brand new government, that will be important. Now, obviously, that rubbed a lot of people the wrong way at the time. But what connects that with this current moment in a weird kind of a twisted way is that there is a certain level, and we still, I think, live with this sort of idea that in the United States, you can make money, you can get a house, you can have a car. I mean, I know now you can't, but what I'm saying is that there's a tradition of those ideas that lurks. That money is success, and that the United States is a place where you can earn money, unlike some other places. And that goes all the way back too, but it goes to the idea of land, right? That in the United States, there's land, and you can go there and get land far more readily than you can in Europe. And then you could farm your land and make money and be successful and be independent and blah, blah, blah. But that idea on a certain level has for so long been so inherently American that the sort of little tail of that still survives in this moment that says, well, if you can find a way to make money and you're making money on a certain level, you're a success. That also gets back to framing, but I don't think that's entirely left us. So that in a certain way, people who are using access to find ways to enrich themselves, as much as that is the definition of corruption in a certain way. And this is the framing that Trump always used, right? I'm a smart guy. I can get away with this stuff because I'm a smart businessman and I know how to play this stuff so that I can benefit from it. And yeah, I don't pay a lot of taxes, but look at what a smart guy I am, because I don't have to do these things. And thus you should vote for me because somehow or other that makes me superior. That weird framing and the idea of money as success, even as we readily acknowledge the corruption and the extreme excessive wealth that we're faced with right now, buying a presidency, I don't think those things necessarily sadly, are mutually exclusive.
Okay, let me go back, though, to Hamilton, because one of the things that I always really appreciated about Hamilton is his tendency to look at human nature as deeply problematic, which sounds funny coming from me because I'm the world's biggest optimist, right? But that idea that you must always prepare for the worst in a system rather than assuming the best, is something that I think, I always emphasize to people. We don't need laws for the, 90% of people who are great. We need the laws for those people who suck, right? But that idea that rich people need to buy into the government is all over the Civil War and Civil War finances. And I'm 100% behind it, because the argument during the Civil War was that if rich people, especially in New York and Philadelphia, had bought bonds for the United States government, they were going to do everything they could to make sure the United States government survived. And one of the things that jumps out to me about this corruption that we're talking about in this moment is that we have an uber wealthy group of oligarchs around the world who are not invested in their countries, or at least in the United States. Again, I shouldn't speak for other countries, so much as they are invested in their own families. And that, if you look, for example, at the Trump family, if something suddenly goes wrong for them, I don't expect that they will sit there in Florida and wait for the law to catch up with them. They'll just hop to another country. And I wonder then if part of the corruption that we are seeing is really the idea that we've lost the idea that you got to take care of your government because it takes care of you. And I mean that, speaking as some, robber baron. And we've come to a different kind of understanding of the flow of money that says, so long as you have this sort of cocoon of really rich people all over the world, it doesn't matter what you do within any specific country. You can just bleed it dry.
Right.
And obviously they're not going to be bleeding the U.S. dry, but it's a different mindset. They're not invested in U.S. treasuries. They're invested with, or they're working with, Mohammed bin Salman in Saudi Arabia. So who cares if they take $10 billion out of the U.S. Treasury?
Right, but I'll add a wrinkle to that. I think that's true. And I think that you're correct. They are invested in themselves and their families. But a sort of additional level of corruption is they're invested in a system that lets them get away with that. They're invested in the malfunctioning. They're invested in a system that is failing in many ways, meaning they rely on the malfunctioning and the gaps and the ways in which things aren't being enforced because it lets them get what they want and get away with what they want. And you're right. If something goes wrong here, they just hop to somewhere else. But so not just invested in their families, but invested in the malfunctioning of our current state as it is, because that's what allows this situation not just to exist, but to become more and more extreme over time.
I really like that framing. I really like that idea. It also suggests that as you say, the American people anyway, waking up and saying, hey, wait a minute here, you need to answer to the rule of law is one way to start getting rid of that larger system. I will say, I saw a video the other day from Maxwell Frost of Florida, who's really just terrific. And he came out and was explaining, he's on House Oversight and Reform. And he came out and said, you're all screaming at me about Pam Bondi just not showing up for her deposition under oath about the Epstein files because the committee had subpoenaed her and she just didn't show up because she said, you should have subpoenaed me as Attorney General, and now I'm not Attorney General, I'm a private citizen, so I'm not showing up, which is, I don't believe the way these things work. Not a lawyer, but okay. And she's banking on the fact that the Department of Justice will fight for her so that she doesn't have to testify under oath, which, would be just she either have to not speak or she'd say a lot of stuff that would cause a lot of trouble. And he said, he goes on the video on social media and he says, listen, we are holding her in contempt of Congress, but here we're starting that process. But the problem is there's two kinds of contempt. There is criminal contempt and there is civil contempt. And if we go with criminal contempt, it goes to the Department of Justice, and this Department of Justice isn't going to do anything. If it goes to civil contempt, then it's going to go in front of a judge, and we have a better chance of a judge doing something. And I thought that video was really a marker of a change in that, as you and I both know, the workings of democracy and the workings of our government are really complicated. When you learn them, they're quite easy. It's rather like, any of the things we do on a daily basis that actually take a lot of steps. And if you don't know what those steps are, they're mystifying. But if you do, it's like, oh yeah, this is all I do. Like I knit, and like the first time I tried to make a sock, like it was Sanskrit, right? And now
I'm like driving, right? When you drive and you suddenly realize you've gotten somewhere and you don't know how you've gotten there, and it's because it's complicated if you think about it.
But to have Frost just say, your government is working. Here are the obstacles, and here's what we're trying to do. I just thought that, to me, it made me jump back to the Kennedy-Nixon debates, when those debates were in 1960 were all about the committees that the men sat on and what they were doing on those committees and how that ability that they were learning in those committees would make them a good president. And I don't think we've had anybody even talk about that stuff really since. So I just thought that was a really, it's only a couple seconds video. I don't think you necessarily have to see it because I just told you everything that's in it. But the fact that you had this young representative coming out and saying, here's how it works, here's the problem, here's what we're doing, just seemed to me to be like 10 years ago. Can you imagine any member of Congress going straight to the people and saying, let me explain to you what we're doing on this really fairly small issue? I just thought it was a big deal.
It is a big deal. And it's a big deal in part because the smoke and mirrors helps everyone on the inside, right? It does not, in some ways, it does not serve them if everything is that straightforward and we understand it. It serves them, it's most convenient for them if that is not happening. Because when that is happening, we actually then begin to have a sense of what should be happening or what can be happening or what can't be happening. So yeah, no, I think that is a big deal. That should be happening a lot more, and it should have been happening a lot more before now. But yeah, that's actually going all the way back to when Trump was elected for his second term, and people were saying there needs to be some kind of shadow government in which people step forward and say, this is what's happening now. This is how it's happening. This is what it means. That's a flavor, a version of what you're talking about here. And that brings us back to the essence of democracy, which is we, the people, understanding what's going on at a moment where obfuscation is the name of the game.
Except I think now the media, the new media is doing it. I have to tell you, how so for those of you who are listening, Joanne and I are of a certain age, although she's significantly older than I am. And I'm sorry, that joke is getting old. We are virtually the exact same age.
Like both of us, but go ahead.
Yeah. But we came up through our profession when people really weren't studying politics. And we were two of the very few people studying politics, and two of the only women studying politics. I was
going to say, yeah.
And I will never forget. And so when we taught, we taught a lot of social history and a lot of sort of the larger social meanings of major events, which is important. And I will never forget one day teaching the Civil War, and it must have been, at this point, 15 years ago, let's say, maybe 20 years. It's before I went to BC. And just offhand, like I was doing the usual, these are the people involved, and here's, and I said, and Lincoln declared a blockade on the southern ports, which was a real mistake because you only blockade a foreign country. He should have simply closed the ports. And I went on to something else. And this hand goes up and somebody goes, what? And I was like, well, there's a legal definition of what a blockade is, and that, that caused trouble. And somebody else goes, there's a legal definition of that? And I was like, yeah, all of this is bounded by the law. And they're like, how does that work? And I thought, I've never heard this before, but these students are thirsty for this kind of emphasis on how the system works, not how the people within it, but how the system works. And I said to them, do you want more of this stuff? Because I can teach this material that way as well. And they were like, absolutely, we've never heard this stuff before. And that to me was a real sign. And now, of course, those people are in their 30s and 40s.
Right. And I don't think it isn't even, I was about to say, just students. Back in the ancient days, when I was first, using social media, and I was on Twitter, and I would go on, there would be something happening, and I would say, okay, here is the definition of this. Here's what this means, and here's what the law says about it, which felt to me like the most obvious thing in the world. And the response was, oh, wait, what? There's a definition and there are legal implications, which then led me to keep doing that again and again and again for the same reason, that we forget that sort of basic, well, that gets back to smoke and mirrors, right? It behooves the people who are in power to not focus on actual legality and the law and the actual clear divisions between right and wrong. It's more convenient for them if we don't know that. I like the fact that this has become, not that I didn't think it would be, because I think you and I both are inherently optimists, but it has become a particularly optimistic conversation, in part because of independent media and the fact that we are getting facts of a kind that for a while we were not.
Well, and what you just said, I think, is really important, because there is a logic to the law and there is a logic to democracy. And I think both of us get really angry, all of us get really angry when we see situations that we feel are unjust. And if you have nowhere to channel that anger, you sit there and you say, what can I do? Like, I can stand on a street corner, but that's not going to fix and, fill in the blank of what you're mad about. But if you say, wait a minute, here's what's happening. And here's the lanes that you can divide that into. Here are places I can put pressure. Or, what jumped to my mind was Rosa Parks, when she was working for the NAACP, what she began to collect long before she didn't stand up on the bus, she was collecting testimony and evidence about sexual assaults against Black women in southern states, so that was a law where you could take these guys to court and say, here's evidence that you sexually assaulted this person. And while in the South, in the 1940s and 1950s, that usually went nowhere against white men, what it did do is it enabled a whole bunch of people who were mad about segregation to say, wait a minute, I'm just not sort of vaguely mad.
Right.
This person committed a heinous crime against an individual. There's evidence of that, and they got away. We need to fix this system. And that gives you power.
It is the power. And when we say it's a crime, we're not just saying it's a bad thing. We're saying it's a legal crime. It is a concrete thing. It's not just a bad thing someone got away with. That the system is in place, ideally, to address that kind of crime, to offer ways in which people who commit those crimes, when they have a fair trial, can be found, if they are guilty of committing that crime. And you're right, it's the rule of law, the Constitution, all of these things that feel in some way, sort of ethereal. They're not. They're the essence of accountability. They are how you hold people accountable for committing crimes, for doing things that they shouldn't be allowed to do. And in the case of the Constitution, for acting against the fundamentals of a democratic government. So yeah, absolutely. And again, to link this back to kind of where we started, you need the media, and you need people who are willing to go online and say this bluntly. You need people to say in very clear terms, this is how things work, or how they're supposed to work, and here's what we can do about it, so that the things are working the way that they should. Because we have things in place that address this. We need to understand that as we, the people, and those things need to be in operation.
And we're working at it.
We are.
Joanne, this is always so much fun.
It is eternally fun.
I know you're on your way out for a run and to see Gary the Apple Guy. And
Gary the Apple Guy.
So I clean my bathroom on Saturdays. That's what I go do.
I'm having more fun going to visit Gary the Apple Guy than you are cleaning your bathroom. I can. But I have this routine. So thank you. And we need to plot for next week because I think I'm away, but maybe we will plot.
Maybe not. But anyway, it's always a joy. Thank you everybody for coming.
Thank you. As ever, all of you people for showing up.
On a Saturday morning. Admit it, you just don't want to clean your bathrooms. Anyway.
They want to go buy apples.
There you go. That's right. They want to go do something more fun than this. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you. And this has been really cool. I love where we go with these. And just so you know, people, this is actually how we talk when we're alone too.
Yeah. I mean, if that's not apparent, I mean, sometimes when we begin and we're like already halfway through laughing about something, like we already started before we come on. So yes.
Well, this is when I loved that the Bechdel test about you had to, women in movies who don't talk about something other than men and all that, because like this is how I talk with my girlfriends. This is like this. We really do talk this way. So so you're behind the scenes here with the two of us. Although Joanne usually has coffee.
I know. Now I'm going to get coffee.
So I finished mine. All right. Love you, Joanne. Thanks for doing this. And I will talk to you soon.
Heather. See you soon and love you guys.
Thank you for being here, everybody.
Hey, everybody.
Someone says say hi to Gary the Apple Guy.
I will totally say hi to Gary the Apple Guy.